Hello, and welcome in the exhibition Sign of the Times at the Swiss Architecture Museum. This is one of the last days that you can see this show, and before it goes away, I want to take a last tour for friends and other people who haven't been able to see it. It's a really, really special show, and I want to give you a tour through it to explain you why I really liked it. I'll turn around the camera now so that you can get an idea. What you're looking at is actually the 16 best master theses of Swiss architectural schools that have been made in 2022 and 2023. And this time there were 1,000 master theses being produced in 9 architectural schools in Switzerland. And what we're going to do now is we're going to the very beginning of the show, which is around the corner. And I look with you at some of the projects and tell you why I like them. So the show is basically started with this really beautiful and iconic project, Paris Transit, which is a transformation of a huge market, marché en gros, in a distribution center for food, basically. It's a project that was done by, or at the chair of Eric Lapierre at EPFL, and the authors are Marie-Ange Ferrel and Manuel Rossi. This project is about giving a second life to a structure which was built in 1967 together with the Boulevard Périphérique in Paris, and which has been defunct for a number of years now. The authors of the project tried to resuscitate this structure, turning it into a distribution center for sustainably, organically farmed produce before it is actually being distributed the last mile with cargo bikes to food places and supermarkets in Paris. And the idea is basically that the transport of this stuff into Paris is being done in a decarbonized way, not with cars, but with electrical cargo bikes, and that the cargo bikes also take the unsold produce back that would be otherwise thrown away and bring it back to this building, and where it will be given as food basically for the cantine solidaire, basically a restaurant where people that don't have enough money to buy food in restaurants can actually eat them. It's a beautiful project with very nice drawings. As you can see them here on the wall, but especially, of course, we like these amazing drawings that are up here on this big panel, which remind us of the axonometrical drawing style of the Architectural Association in the 70s, 80s, and then of course of the Office for Metropolitan Architecture. In this first space, actually almost all projects deal with climate change. For instance, this project by Michael Nelson, Landscape Infrastructure as Strong Forms, done at the chair of Corinna Men at ETH Zurich, proposes an infrastructure which is actually one of the recurring themes in this show. A lot of the times the authors don't really make straightforward buildings, but divert into other kinds of areas of construction. This project is basically a dam that tries to mitigate the effects of the melting glaciers. We look at the alpine landscape around the Aletsch glacier, and you can see here that in 2035 the glacier is already very diminished, but in 2050 it will actually be completely gone. And that means, actually, like all glaciers in Switzerland, and it's worth remembering that we used to have more than 2,000. So there will be a problem that all of this water that is actually stored in the glacier so far will come down, and with it also rocks that are basically bound in the glacier. This presents quite some danger for actually the places in the valley. So to prevent all this stuff, the water and the rocks from crushing down and destroying whatever is in the way, the author here proposes a dam, which is this thing, to uphold all this material. That's what we've seen here in the drawing. Now, how does this actually work? We can see it is basically a structure that is built by these kind of oblique posts that hold this this kind of street in the air. We can see this construction machine coming here and basically redistributing the rocks that have been collected from the upper parts of the valley. And in the end, they're supposed to fill the entire structure or the inflow space of the construction and produce this huge dike or dam. And that will basically create the barrier for more stones to come and also water. So we can see it here. Basically, the interesting thing that I like about this project is that it proposes a new paradigm, not to defend ourselves against nature, see the nature as the enemy that now basically punishes us for our problematic dealing with climate change, because we have produced the climate change. But basically it says, okay, the rocks are the problem, but the rocks are also the solution. They can be part of the solution by basically creating this, this protection structure against the stones. So that kind of approach, actually, we find in this exhibition time and time again. There's another project that I like a lot, which applies the same type of thinking, maybe even more radically, to an even more challenging type of landscape, which is the coastline of the North Sea, north of Germany, which is, as any kind of maritime landscapes, threatened by the problem of rising sea levels. These areas are all facing storm surges in ever increasing or decreasing cycles, and something must be done to prevent casualties. The last storm surge in this area caused 4,000 people to die. The next one would probably sacrifice 11,000. To prevent that, the German government made scenarios that it has to basically create higher dams. They would need to elevate the dams to a height of 11 meters. 9 meters, I'm sorry. 9 meters is basically 3 stories, and it means that basically no house built behind the dam would have any kind of view of the sea. So we see this model here. The project is actually done by Leslie Meyer, important to note, and it was done at the ETH under the supervision of Tom Emerson and Milica Topalovic. So the problem is, we see here the dam. You can see how much it is basically separating the landscape of the sea over here from the hinterland until actually the beginning of the city over there. We can see it even better on the plan. So we can see here, this is the dam in various structures. And her approach is basically to say, to defend ourselves against nature by building ever higher dams that actually become ever more unstable the higher we build them, we should actually synergize with nature, empathize with it, and accept the behavior of nature to basically create higher amounts of water. And she basically says the sea isn't the enemy, but the sea is basically our ally. If we want to achieve a real change that is sustainable. So she proposes actually to open the dam in a controlled way in the winter time, when the sea becomes more aggressive and storm surges are more common. So you can see here now that 2 times a day, when the flood comes, the water would actually flood the area between the dam and the city, which itself lies a little bit higher still. With the water, there are sediments that are floating in the water of the sea, and those sediments, they actually stay behind on this hinterland. Per year, you can increase the level of the soil by about 2 to 6 centimeters, which means over time you could actually increase the level of the soil instead of increasing the height of the dam. This is what we can see beautifully in this amazing model, which is actually built out of sand. Also this part, it's compacted. And we can see here this moment where the sediments are left behind and slowly build up this area. This line in the middle is actually a building that is placed there in an elevated composition. You can see it's slightly higher. We can see it over in the visualizations over there. These are vacation homes, because this area is used touristically, but also agriculturally. And in the summer, tourists live in these things. And in the winter, the space below here will be flooded, which you can see here, right? But in the winter, it doesn't matter, because then tourists are not there. And then through this cyclical flooding, the area will be increased over time. One of the things that I really find very impressive about this project is the insane amount of models that the author has produced. The smallest of which we have actually here, which tries to visualize the effect of the incoming waves, you can see them here, on the structure that is built behind the dam. But actually this is the smallest model, and if we look at the brochure here, you can also see some of these big structures that Leslie Meyer has built at the Institute for Wasserbau at ETH. And when you go through this kind of brochure, you actually see how much hard work and hardware was actually produced in her process, which is going way beyond design, but actually delving into prototyping, I would say. There's a lot of interest actually in this project, as also in many other projects, to really know whether the thesis of the project, the hypothesis, actually could work in reality. We can actually see that in almost none of the descriptions of the projects by the students, we hear the word utopia. It seems a concept that young architects today are not really interested in anymore, because it seems to console ourselves with the idea that desirable ideas may not be realized, so they're nice ideas, but they cannot become reality. These people here are interested in actually making things work, and soon, because climate change will come, and it is already there, and it changes our lives already. So there is an urgency and an impatience in the works and the minds of these architects that let us know we have to do something now. And you can feel this kind of anxiety and this eagerness of changing things, even in this really incredible manipulation of the local newspaper of Husum, which is the city that is the site of this project, where the author of this project actually simulated like the cover page of the day when this structure would be inaugurated. So she, in some ways, sort of anticipates that moment of the actual realization of this project. You can really feel how she is just impatient to make it happen. You can see it in, there's a certain kind of, how could you say, acceptance of global climate change, in the sense that this generation no longer ignores the fact that temperatures will rise, like maybe their parental generation treats this just as an abstract fact, but these people will be physically and biographically affected by these climate change effects. As much, for instance, just like the rising temperatures in our cities. And so this project, which is staged in Winterthur actually, takes the fact that our cities will become as warm as Mediterranean cities today for a fact, and looks at what this would do in a city like Winterthur. So Machina Citrea by Stephanie Hug, done at the HSLU in Luzern, under the supervision of architect Johannes Käferstein, studies such a scenario in an interesting non-romantic way, I would say. So she says, okay, if we have to imagine that Winterthur will have the climate of a city such as Verona in Italy, it means we could actually grow lemons in buildings. And she proposes to make a housing building with a vertical greenhouse, as we can see here in the section. And the greenhouse would actually be the place where you can cultivate these lemons. And it would create different seasonal concepts of housing. The housing is attached behind. You can see here that's the summer scenario. Then this facade would be closed. The greenhouse has higher temperatures, outside 30, here 27, and you protect this space climatically from it. And in the winter time, you open these spaces between housing and the winter garden, and you can actually expand the flat in this space and use it as well. What makes this project possible is actually these wind towers that iconographically maybe remind us of the many chimneys that used to exist in Winterthur. But these chimneys basically are solar chimneys now, and suck fresh air through the building, and as the air gets warm, it creates this movement of air, convection goes up, and basically creates cross ventilation throughout the entire building. So there is a certain kind of acceptance of these changes that we will have to deal with, and the attempt to actually deal with it and make something with it. In this case, you can grow these lemons and make a liquor out of it, which will then be produced in an ancient factory that used to be there on the site. So that to some extent the idea of labor and work is reintroduced in this project. We can quickly have a look at a project that is also in this first space, which deals with the fact that many of our skiing areas in Switzerland will no longer be possible to be used for skiing. We are here in the Misox Valley, and the problem is simply that the snow simply will only fall in the higher areas, and sometimes the lift structures here are simply below, where there will be no snow anymore. So the question is, what do we do with these ski lift structures, these steel structures that are quite elaborated, and they are distributed all across the mountains. The author of this project was Sandro Hauser. It's a project again done at ZHAW in Winterthur with Ingrid Burgdorf, Andreas Sonderegger and Mark Löhliger. The project actually proposes to keep these structures but reprogram them for other purposes. We can see one scenario which is shown here, where the structure is simply kept in place as it is. Given a roof, we can see that the transporting function is still applied, but not for people anymore, but actually for chestnuts. This is an area where chestnuts are cultivated and processed. We can see a structure that is built below here to house some of the logistics of the production process of the chestnuts. You can see it here in the plan as well, so that this structure could still be useful. You can see it here in this beautiful axonometrics. So while this is being done at the valley, quite low, higher up we find places where people can stay that actually help in the harvest of the chestnuts. And you can see here, that's this refugio. And the whole structure has been turned on its head. We can still put a lorry on the wheels so that they can be transported from the top to the bottom. And so here we see in the axonometrics how this kind of hybrid construction of a reused infrastructure for ski lifts is combined with, as we can see here, traditional wall structures as they are used in this area to make space for both people and logistical functions. Yeah, so let's go into the second space, which greets us with a lot of very different projects. This is one of the interesting signs of this exhibition, that there is no unifying format anymore, neither formally nor ideological for these projects. Each project kind of produces its own world. Many of the projects are free thesis projects. That means the students could actually really define their own scenario and define the place, the site, actually the topic, and also the program of the project. This is one project that I like quite a lot, by Roxane Noel Unterberger, done at the Accademia di Architettura in Mendrisio under the supervision of Muk Petzet. And Roxane Unterberger took a project in Brussels, that is a site that was given to them, and she found an empty bank building, which is here. And in this area, she found a lot of homeless people that would be sleeping out in the open, under tents, in entrances of commercial buildings. And she proposes to actually transform this bank building, that apparently is not needed anymore, into an asylum for homeless people. She refuses the idea to create emergency shelters for homeless people, but says these people need permanent housing, decent housing, like anybody else. They are not a problem that needs to be put in an emergency shelter, but they deserve housing just as the rest of us. You can see how the former office floors of the bank building are now being transformed into apartments. And she perforates some of the facades, rearranges the circulation, adds a stairway to create a different kind of flow through the building. And what is really remarkable about also the presentation and the entire attitude by which she actually approaches this problem is that I think are these drawings. I really love these drawings. They're done by hand, as you can see, and they're almost like an artwork in its own right, I think. And it matters to show these people because we are socially trained to overlook these people. Because we cannot deal with the shame and our failure to, as very rich countries in the West, to provide a system that makes homelessness obsolete. By the way, the European Union actually has pledged to make homelessness obsolete by the year 2030. Quite unclear how this can happen, because in the moment, especially during COVID, we had a massive increase of homelessness. Homeless people were very exposed to this problem, and actually the problem grew in size. It goes to the moment where Roxane Unterberger created this beautiful stop animation film, this cartoon, out of these drawings, and it's with a beautiful soundtrack, and takes you on a ride of how does it feel to live on the street and what could it mean to actually live in this building. And what we can see is, for instance, that she creates this garden between the two buildings that are existing. And the garden doesn't exist yet, and she uses this garden actually as a first kind of training ground for homeless people to actually learn how to live in buildings yet again, because it's quite known that it's not easy for homeless people to live in closed rooms after having lived on the street for years. they get anxiety attacks, and they have to come to terms with this existence again. So what they can do here in this garden is actually they can build up a tent. This can really be created like elongated like this, sleep in the open first here, maybe in the garden, and being sure that they cannot be molested during the night because they are secure. Then they can sleep actually under the tent roof and start to get, start to get familiar with the idea of an enclosure, then maybe in this kind of little hut, and then maybe in the end, actually in this building. It is, I think it's really, really moving how this project basically defines its own program and creates an architecture of necessity for which we don't yet have programs. So that's a project that actually should happen, even if it, or especially because it hasn't happened so far. We find here a project which probably escapes the classical idea of a master thesis in architecture the most of all of these projects, but actually a lot of them does this. It's a project that was done under the supervision of Anne Fontaine and Philipp Ursprung, and it's done by Marine Gigondet, Janusz Kircher and Johannes Pfeiffer. And the site of this project is at the south of Colombia. We can see this drawing that actually brings us into the Amazonas. In the video we can see actually how this landscape looks, an incredibly dense rainforest. It's a site where there is a project to create a university for the Puri, which is one of the indigenous tribes, the over 100 indigenous tribes that do exist in the Amazonas in Colombia. The idea of the university would actually be to create a structure where the knowledge, the cultural knowledge of the people in Puri, the Inga, that's the name of the tribe, could actually be conserved and organized and consolidated, as all of these indigenous tribes are under a lot of pressure to leave these areas because the governments have a lot of economical interest to basically find resources in these areas. The authors of this project made a couple of hikes actually through this landscape, which is quite an exhausting exercise because it's very mountainous, it's very topographical, and it's not easy to walk these areas. They try to figure out what it actually means to go from A to B, how long it takes. That is a hike, for instance, that took, I think, 24 hours. And along the way, they tried to figure out, okay, where would it be useful to have, for instance, a structure where you could stay overnight? Where would it be useful to have a bridge? Because you need to cross the water. We see at the same time what the character of the landscape is made of. Every now and then we find the proposal of an infrastructural element, more bridges, but then we also see the flora and fauna of this whole place. Photographs line these drawings to give us more of an idea of how the place looks. This is the other hike. The drawings were actually made back in Zurich after they had lived in this place for a couple of months. And they went to Colombia really not as architects, but actually as students who wanted to learn about the relationship of cultural knowledge and the physical environment, and what architecture can do to actually consolidate the knowledge of this area in meaningful ways. We see here again proposals of structures that could be built. The students worked a lot with the local people and created drawings and like scenarios that they drew. For instance, this one here doesn't show any architecture. It actually is simply mapping the structure of the vegetation and how it articulates in space, in the space of the landscape. Here you can see some of the many workshops they did together with them. So the idea of the project, I think, is really to try to invert the colonial relationship of the first world and third world, and to not colonialize this place yet another time, but find a way how to materialize knowledge that is about to disappear and that is threatened, and give ourselves the understanding of how we could help in these areas in novel ways. This is a project that I like also a very lot, which is about a type of nature that we have already lost. It's a project by Rebecca Stressler, which was done at, again, Winterthur School of Architecture. The author is Rebecca Stressler, and she focuses on this scenario. Why did landscapes such as this in St. Gallen, Canton St. Gallen, that were defined by very generous structures of fruit plantations, why did these disappear in favor of this kind of dystopian scenario of a suburban sprawl that eats away all these kind of fruit plantations? And she focused on these residual areas in the village here in Zutzwil that are still existing, but may not exist there for much longer if the pressure to build is realized or is abided by as it has been done before. She wants to study how the tree could be considered as an occupant of this territory already, that has needs, not only above ground, but also spatial needs below ground that need to be respected if you want the tree to stay. Which I think probably was the idea of the people that moved into this area, because they wanted to live in nature. Unaware of the fact that by simply moving there and cutting down the trees, they would destroy this very dream. The author of this project tries to actually figure out how many of the trees can still be kept if you insert housing here, and how would that insertion of housing need to be done. She studied a couple of scenarios of what kind of housing plans could be used here in this area. And we look here at the ground floor level of this project, and we can see how these buildings create niches to make room for the trees. You can see here the kind of the house kind of pulls its belly to the inside to make room for this kind of tree. And the trees are actually considered as natural extensions of the buildings, and important elements that define the space already, and the houses are just supposed to fill in the blanks. Some of the trees needed to be cut, some trees would be added, we can see them here. And to disrupt the natural environment as little as possible, none of the buildings have basements. The buildings are just above the ground and have a very fine foundation work by these piles, so that the building is basically lifted. And this kind of joint here is actually very important, because it's a space where animal species that need protected spaces can actually settle and survive. Modern architecture has done a lot to annihilate those niches for various kind of animal species, and this project tries to correct that. You can see here how beautifully this housing plan is reorganized based on the acceptance of the predominance of the trees as the major elements of the site that want to be conserved, and therefore the apartment plan is a reaction to these kind of spatial informations and givens. And ultimately you can see that this very light pavilion kind of architecture creates an environment, if we look at the model, that actually makes room for nature, that creates actually that dream that the people that originally went here in this single family home or multi-family home environments, wanted to have in the first place, destroyed it by their own cunning, and now we can see a way how architecture can react and respond to a natural given environment without annihilating it. And I think this is the beauty of this work, that it shows how architecture has to reconfigure itself, reorganize its own way of touching the territory. And now these people are basically able to still enjoy the pleasure of nature. You can still hear the birds because they have places where they can be, namely trees. And people can enjoy this kind of natural surroundings when they actually sit on the collective rooftops up here. And it shows actually this could be a possible scenario that you could use in many different places. Not simply in this specific site. It's what I would call suburban prototypology. And like many of the projects here, we could say that you could apply the proposed scenario of the design and the intervention in many different places that have similar settings. This project is also such an example. It was done as well as at the HSLU in Luzern with Peter Althaus, and the author is Rebecca Baer. She transformed a vacant bank building, actually two buildings, that stand empty in the middle of the city of Lugano. And the only thing that actually currently happens with this building is the planning and the construction of a tramway line that would run in the middle of these, in the space in the middle of these two buildings, coming out of this hilly condition here. And as there is this transformation of the space in between the buildings, she says, okay, let's continue that and reconsider the potential of these two buildings as housing. So she proposes to transform the office function into housing, and the most important transformation she proposes is to create a completely new circulation structure. We see these bridges that combine or that connect the two buildings, and that have access galleries at either facade of the two buildings, so that the entire act of accessing this structure is actually done in this kind of central space between these buildings, which hitherto was empty. We can see there is still the car park at the bottom. On the ground floor we have the tram line that comes through this kind of tunnel at the back. We have various kinds of commercial spaces or spaces for collective uses in the first two levels, and higher up we have apartments. You can see them here in the sections and here in the renderings. And she shows quite elegantly how office spaces, just look at this section, which used to be a free plan office floor with a circulation just next to it, and there's another segment, another staircase, and another office floor segment, and yet another staircase, how they could be turned into various kinds of apartment plans for different needs. And something that is actually interesting is that she also transforms the staircase houses, or the stair houses, which are actually no longer needed because the entire circulation is actually done in this kind of new structure that she has proposed. And her idea is actually to propose these former staircases, here we can see the lift and there's the stairs, into vertical apartments as well, that use the stairs to create split levels between that actually can unfold vertically. We can see them here. So an entire structure that was never actually intended for any kind of domestic scenario is actually transformed into a domestic scenario. Actually, we can see here the rooftops, which are collective spaces then and can be used for all kinds of communal activities. So we can see that it's perfectly feasible to basically hack a typology that was quite functionally streamlined to serve one program only can be entirely rethought and basically create a second life for a structure that at the moment is an utter failure because nobody knows what to do with this building. Let's have a last look in this model of this really quite sublime project. We can see, have a look at another project which is here on the screen, which is a project that was done at ETH Zurich under the supervision of Elie Musayebi, and is done by Fabiana Frisulo. 2021, a Zurich Odyssey, studies the consequences of the melting of the glaciers, like the first project we looked at, or the second project. And it actually starts by visualizing the normalcy of flooding situations in our villages and cities. And it is kind of surreal because she shows it as a very everyday element, just like when rain would fall. But actually we can see a scenario that would strike us today as still some sort of catastrophe that disrupts the livelihoods of people quite in a major way. She wants to say basically this is something that we have to understand as becoming a normal event in our lives, and not only outdoors, but also it could flood parking structures that cyclically would be underwater, because simply as glaciers have are gone, there's no way how the water can turn into snow and be stored there during winter, but actually will come down as liquid immediately, and we will have an oversupply of water in the winter time and an undersupply of water in the summer. And to compensate and offset this kind of disbalance between supply of water and need of water, she proposes these circular retention basins in the valley that would be filled with water as the valley is flooded. We can see this here in the end of the winter and beginning of spring, and as the water recedes during the warmer seasons, it will keep this water in its own confines and put it at the display of and the disposal of whoever needs the water in summertime, which will become increasingly warm, of course, as we already experience with our summers that get warmer and warmer every day, or every year, basically. So there is, again, a project that tackles a problem that seems to be too strong and too powerful for an architect to handle, or for architecture to handle. Apparently, the authors are not shy to tackle these problems because they say these are the relevant problems. We need to work with them. And if architecture itself is too small to deal with the scale of and the magnitude of this issue, we have to basically take other elements, which is basically infrastructure. So probably like 5 or 10 years ago, some of these projects here would have been dismissed at architecture schools because they would say simply that's an engineering project. We want to see an architectural project, so give us your building, and otherwise forget about this project. We can say from this kind of fact that these projects are now considered to be prize-worthy projects and actually belong to the creme de la creme of projects that are done at Swiss architecture schools, that something has changed, apparently, in architecture schools. There is an understanding that with the changing of the conditions of our world, architecture needs to change as well. And it leads to projects that really tackle situations that architects may have avoided so far. This project is one of them. We are looking at a project called Das Unfertighaus, the house that is not finished, the non-finito house. I love the subtitle of this project, Constructing Ongoingness, It's done by David Ward and Ralf Schweitzer, done under the supervision of Anne Fontaine in ETH Zurich. Originally, this was a project that had a huge model, which you can see here only in this photograph. It was so big that it would fill almost this entire table, but the authors at the time when they made their project didn't think that it would be shown at this exhibition and didn't have a space to actually store it. And so these parts of the model are the only relics that we still have left. But it's a very beautiful and very worthwhile project to show, because the premise of the project is quite unusual. They decided to focus on an entire block in the center of Zurich, close to the Zurich main station, and look at this quite normal situation with housing, but also infrastructure such as this gas station or a car wash somewhere else. And they tried to figure out where could you actually transform this structure, but only really where it actually made sense, and where you could simply just leave it. And so we see in the model that there's always a coexistence of parts that are old and other parts that they add. It's not always easy to actually understand what is the new part. That's quite nice, I think. And so we can still see it. So for instance, we will see here this car wash that has actually an addition on top, which they added. We can say that because here this car wash is actually visible in its current form. And then we see the plans that actually tell us there again in the model we see how the structure has been transformed now. What is absolutely amazing and what consoles us a little bit about the disappearance of many parts of the model are the model photographs. There is an insane care that was invested by the authors in the making of the models. You can see how super detailed and how lovingly they have been produced. I mean, there's a level of detail that is simply unbelievable. And they built these models so well so that they also could take these quite, unbelievably well-made photographs of the model. It's an almost, it's an approach that almost, reminds ourselves of Thomas Demann's artistic work. In the photograph of the model, the project really gains the momentum and it becomes real. It's very convincing, and you want to lose yourself in the spaces that you can study in the photographs. Look at this. There's the model again, which is a feast for the eye as well. Look at the poetry of this beer bottle that has fallen down. And somehow I cannot help but thinking that in the extreme degree of love and care that the authors of this project invested in the modeling and in the visualization of their dreams, you can feel the overpowering empathy of this project toward this place of the city. Yeah, we can have a look at a very different project, which is yet again bringing us far away from architecture. We are actually looking at a project that proposes an intervention in a landscape, actually in an agricultural landscape. This is Poland. Poland is a country that uses 93% of its territories for agricultural production of different forms, many of them crop fields, as you can see here. And Poland is a country that had undergone quite a traumatic story of transformation, territorial transformation. If we look at this project by Alicja Prosinska, which was done at the chair of Christgantenbein at ETH, she reminds us of this situation that after World War II, Poland lost this part of its territory towards Soviet Union, that's now mostly Ukraine, and gained in compensation this area of former Germany. So it was pushed back basically from east to west for quite a bit. That meant the resettling of more than 1 million people across the entire territory of the then displaced Poland, and the need to actually create 6,000 state-run farms by the communist government at that time. Together, so the state farms included places where the displaced farmers now would live, which are these structures. They are actually, can you see it here? Almost like little prefab panel housing sites that have been produced in the 1950s and exist still today. In 1953, the entire territory of Poland was put under a land reform and basically was nationalized. 40 years later, it was again subjected to a land reform and became privatized because communist economy had broken down and the free market economy made its entry into Poland, causing 700,000 farmers to lose their jobs. Many of them left the country, others tried to make a living and reorganizing their lives. So, and one problem of them that was that they still would live in these prefab panel type buildings that often had one problem, which was, as you can see here, that they were not really insulated thermally. Creating situations where someone would solve this problem by insulating a part of their apartment themselves, leaving the other building still in this derelict condition. This is where Alicia's project cuts in, and she says, okay, couldn't we solve this issue systemically and only using local resources? We look at this crop field here, and she says the parts of the maize crop that cannot be used for food production, which is either thrown away otherwise or being turned into animal fodder, could be actually used to create a type of thermal insulation, which we're going to look at in a minute. But let's focus now at the beginning, at this point in time, at these structures that she places on the fields. These are drying racks for the organic matter, because it will be dried to look like this. And then it will be combined with mycelium that is used as binder, which creates a kind of dough, you could almost say. And this kind of mashed structure, which will then be put in an oven that looks like this. And out of the oven comes, at the end of this treatment, this type of product. It's a very strange material. It's very interesting to the touch. It's a mixture of satin and something crusty, crunchy. This material, an entirely organic material that has very good thermal insulation materials, will be actually used to insulate these buildings. And the way that she does it is that after producing these mats, they need to be air dried very well, so that there's no moisture inside, so that the organic kind of reaction inside is really stopped. And once they're actually dried, you can see that we have these drying racks in front of the facades of the building. The mats can be actually applied to the facades, and now we have these floors that become extensions of the houses. And one of the advantages of this type of organic thermal insulation is that it has a lifespan of 50 years. Our current thermal insulation usually bites the dust after 25 years and more than often produces a huge problem when you want to get rid of it, which is a trash problem. This material holds 50 years. And once you have to take it down because it no longer works, you can actually pulverize it, and put it out as fertilizer on the fields on the crop fields, actually. So we're dealing with the ambition of creating a local circular economy that starts at the maize harvest, out of which will be produced the thermal insulation mats that then can be applied at the state farm housing buildings, where they will stay over 50 years before they get dismantled, pulverized, and used again as fertilizer over the crop fields. So the entire transformation and kind of retrofitting of these buildings that were built in the post-war period is done on a radius of 5 kilometers. So there's no transport involved. All the production is done locally, and it actually becomes an extended business for the farmers, so to speak. What I like about this project is, as Leslie Meyer's project and also Roxanne Unterberger's project and many others here, is the really virtuoso use of films. We can see that the upper screen is actually almost like a documentary film composed of archival material that Alicia Prosinska researched and put together into this film that gives us an idea of how agricultural production was actually organized in Poland during socialism. And the screen below is a walkthrough her project, and she makes a beautiful commentary that you can listen on the headphones that are provided. So it's pretty impressive what architects can do today. They can make model photography that makes you pale, and that would make an artist jealous. So they can make films, documentaries. We've seen these beautiful drawings by Roxanne Unterberger of the homeless people, and many other things. And this culminates now in the last project that I have selected here for a closer look, which is called Hotel National, Arriving Back Home, by Olga Kobuskian, done at the chair of Jan de Wilde at ETH Zurich. This project is in many, many ways quite exceptional. The first thing is maybe that it displays an incredible level of craft, artistry, in terms of the fact that everything that you've seen here, with the exception of the photographs and the second column, is hand drawn. So all these drawings that we can see here are pencil drawings made by hand. Even the text parts are written by hand. So there is maybe even more than in other projects this clearly skeptical attitude towards the promises of the rendering that more than often pretend realities that actually never come into being. So let's look a little bit in detail at this project, because it's in many ways exemplary. We look here at a map of the capital of Moldavia, which is Chisinau, and we see in the very center of the city this structure, which is Hotel National, which used to be the most important, or one of the most important Soviet communist era buildings of Moldavia. It used to be a very fancy hotel with a beautiful interior design. None of this is still existing, the interiors, because they are completely gutted. Because after 2007, the building was decommissioned, was left standing empty. And you can see here how people went inside and took out everything that they wanted. Illegal constructions such as these garages were added. Lots of debris would frame the building around side. Facades were destroyed. So it's basically a mess. Now, Olga was asking herself, what could she do as an architect to initiate a process of reappropriation of this project. She doesn't propose a complete transformation project, but she basically wants to create an awareness in society that something with this building must be done and could be done, to give it again the same type of importance that it used to have. And she wants to identify what kind of social agency could actually make this happen. We have to know that basically this is almost a wonder that the building still exists. It was supposed to be torn down many times to be replaced by Dubai-style housing or building projects. None of which actually have been turned into reality, thankfully. What has happened is a very unlikely scenario, which is that a civic protest group has fought for years to put this building under landmark preservation. And this actually has happened quite recently. So now there is actually some sort of safety for this building, that it will not be demolished in an arbitrary way, but something actually could happen that resuscitates this building. Now, in this situation, Olga Kubuskian made an interesting archaeology of a technique of building that was, or of making things happen, that was very known in the socialist period of Moldavia. Here we see some of the fairly atrocious plans that got never realized to turn this thing into some sort of an icon. Yes, we all know how that would look like. This is actually how the building looked before. Look at this. It is sublime, and it's a big shame that now it looks like this. And to actually make things moving, she identifies a technique of intervention that is called klaka. A klaka is basically a collective action of work that is done in villages when, for instance, someone has lost their house through fire or so. The entire village will get together and build it anew. Klakas were used throughout the history, both in previous times but also until today. Eating is a big important part of it, as you can see. And it obviously is something that actually brings the community together and reunites them around an act of empathy for someone of their community, but also an act of empathy towards the environment. So for instance, if, let's say, a park or a place is kind of, for instance, polluted, and some people have the feeling we would actually like to clean this space again, and then they do it, it brings these people together and it actually solves the problem at the same time. So this klaka, Olga thought, could maybe become an element, a methodology of transformation, and create also an economy, because all of this is done basically without money. She proposes to actually take the public floors of this structure, which is these 3 floors here. That's the hotel and that's the restaurant which is next to it, and proposes to clean the spaces in these areas, also the public spaces, to make them usable again. So what we see here is, for instance, the fountains in front of the hotel, which had before beautiful water jets. It would be too difficult at this point in time to reactivate their original function, so she proposes to actually turn it into a garden. We can see here how people can actually grow plants, flowers, but also wine. Moldavia is a big wine country and uses a very high percentage of its territory for the production of wine. You can see this kind of pergola that would also create shadow, so that makes a lot of sense. And we can see like how both outdoor spaces and indoor spaces could be prepared again to host assemblies of people, events. Here we can see how these illegally added garages at the back facade of the building are taken away and replaced by a staircase that becomes framed by a large garden that actually exists in part already. And this garden then can lead into the building. You go inside the building, can do all kinds of functions here. Just imagine that the upper floors are not touched. They are reserved for later invention and maybe not for public services, but maybe then for private programs. And it leads to a situation where, if we actually look at the drawings at the end, would make it possible to create a public concourse that starts at the back. We can see this park here, leading up through the staircase, going through the building, the facades of which here in the Sockel are left open, to connect to the space of the former fountain, which is now used as a garden for all kinds of plantations. So that space, you have to imagine, is actually here, and it would be basically cutting through a line through this building in continuation of the street that leads towards the building from the airport. So we find a scenario of this project of how these public parts of the building could be reappropriated by the population, which then can actually define together a scenario of the future uses of this building. And what I really find extraordinary is that let's say the most architectural representation of this project is this model that basically shows the preserved structure of this building, the landmark structure. So it's the tectonic structure of horizontal and vertical elements, including the balcony. So this must stay. Everything else could be transformed. And she resists the temptation to kind of tell the story to the end and now program the story by various kinds of programs that she would find interesting. But she says, no, that's no longer my work. My work is actually done here because the idea is now that the civic society takes over and starts a process of discourse and dialogue as to what this building could again become. So probably this project also would not have been accepted as a final thesis not too long ago at architectural schools, because it basically focuses on the definition of a methodology of reactivation of a defunct structure, but it doesn't pretend to have a solution. It doesn't pretend to know what the future of this building will be. It basically just says something should happening with this building and it needs to be defined by civic society. But she identifies a process by how this process can be started. So similar to this project by Alicia Prusinska, and also by this project here in front in Zurich, the Unfertighaus, we see how the projects basically embrace a form of process design, how they want to say, we would like to set a process of transformation in motion, and we would like to identify the vectors of this transformation and how this transformation could actually happen. But we're not interested in anticipating the end result, because there is no end, simply. It is, the idea is actually to say that architecture is never finished. Architecture is all about transformation, and we should understand ourselves as the curators of this transformation. We should understand that we can help others to see future potentials of these conditions. Yeah, the final, the last phase of this project is about making the audience aware of the educational landscape of architecture schools in Switzerland. We see the map of Switzerland at the end of the space and the position of the 12 architecture schools that this country has, 9 of which offer master programs where you can study architecture and end up with a master's degree. Some of these schools have projects that are exposed in this exhibition, and we put this table here that gives each of these schools a segment in which they can present themselves, and by a questionnaire where we asked each of these schools 6 questions to identify what their position on the education of architects defines. And it's actually quite interesting that all these schools have quite different attitudes about how architecture should be taught, what should be taught, which kind of professional identity architects would have once they leave the schools. So we really wanted to know also, what do you think your students will actually work as, in what kind of capacities, professional capacities, they would actually, work. And publications from the schools and give you an idea about their current teaching activities and the ways in which, they practice architectural education. There is statistical information that gives you an idea how these schools are organized in different ways, how many students they have, how many, what kind of programs they offer, what the research focuses are, and so on. And in some way, the space gives younger people the possibility to actually think about where they would like to study architecture if they feel compelled to spend their lives with architecture. And I think that's something that this show actually really can create. It's a show that deals with conditions that are quite dystopic. Vacancy of buildings, melting glaciers, as we can see here, climate change in all of its variations. We see suburban sprawl, destruction of nature, the destruction of the Amazonas and other places, homelessness, and so on. Here, by the way, we see still a project I haven't talked about how to reuse concrete, which is also very worthwhile, but there's some projects that I haven't been able to talk about here. But despite the sometimes dystopic nature of the projects that they're dealing with, the feeling that I get from this exhibition is optimism. I'm really I'm inspired, actually. I'm inspired by the constructive energy of these projects and the architects, the ways in which they deal with often difficult conditions, and the hopefulness, which isn't naive, which is really based on the possibility of things that we can do today. And that's why I would tend to replace the term utopia that we used to attach to projects like these that visualize potentials of transformations that are possible in the future, but often actually more often than not tend to never get realized. I would replace the term of utopia with the term of pragmatopia to highlight the importance of pragmatism in this work. And it's a happy pragmatism, like Nietzsche's happy science. It's the idea that if the utopia presents an idea of a desirable world that we would all love to have, but is so idealistic that it cannot be produced, and therefore never happens and has no place. That's why, topos, no place. Then the pragmatopia is the definition of a world that is both desirable and possible to construct with means that we have at our display today. Because all of these projects thrive on knowledge and know-how that exists today or is about to being researched. What they need to, in order to happen, is a political will. So the pragmatopia is about creating or giving a possible vision of a world, its place. Pragmein means to act, and topos is the place, so it gives a place to an action that is desirable. So this is what these projects are about, and I would like to thank the authors of these projects a lot for their optimism, for their incredible work that they have done, and I think we should watch these people, what they're doing. They will change Swiss architecture, and not only in Switzerland. And I hope, they will also inspire architects that are practicing today to be more radical, and maybe also do projects that they're not called for, because all these projects are self-defined and self-initiated. And of course, I would like to thank the team of the Swiss Architecture Museum that has put together this exhibition in record time. So thanks for everybody in our team who put in amazing work, as well as our partners that have helped us to realize this exhibition in record time. It was only 3 months which we had, and so thanks SIA for this beautiful collaboration, Architekturrat as well, and all the participating architecture schools, and of course, most of all, the people that created all these beautiful ideas. Good luck for your careers, and I admire your spirit.